Welcome to It Feels Like Home, the podcast where real life stories contain moments of faith. I'm Lisa Schudel, and I'm here to share stories of God moments. Whether you're listening on your morning drive, taking a walk, or folding laundry, I hope you find comfort and encouragement. In this first episode, I'd like to share with you why I'm doing this, how I got here, and what it's going to be about. My plan is to do one weekly podcast. Some will be solo. Most will be interviewing someone else, and we will be sharing God stories. There's been times in my life where I'm like, that was a God thing. Some people call it God winks, miracles, or just, gentle reassurance from God or direction. So about 2 years ago, I had a dream. It was very, very vivid. And God told me in the dream that he wanted me to do a podcast about God stories. And honestly, I woke up and I remembered the dream and I thought, I don't want to do a podcast. I don't know how to. I mentioned it to a few people and one of my friends said, you could totally do it. And I kind of just put it out of my mind. And then several months later, a friend of mine was telling me that his wife had a business and she had a podcast studio that people could rent. And then I remembered, like, God had asked me to do this. And I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll rent that studio, but I didn't do it. And that business is no longer there. Then just a few weeks ago, I was scrolling Instagram and Facebook in the morning, and I saw a reel about, if you have something that you want to do, it doesn't matter how old you are, it's never too late. Colonel Sanders was 60 something when he started Kentucky Fried Chicken. And they gave a couple other examples, and I thought, okay, the podcast thing. So I kind of felt like that was the third nudge to do it. So wanting to be obedient and doing God's will, I decided to do this podcast. Now, mind you, I am not technical at all. So I started researching. I was talking to ChatGPT and asking, what do I need to do to start a podcast? And I really didn't want to invest a lot of money buying expensive equipment. So I found this website where you can create podcasts. And niece kind of does this for a living, helps people. So she's been guiding me and finally just getting around to it. It literally has been taking a couple weeks just to get to the point where I'm recording this. So bear with me. I plan on interviewing someone next week. And I just wanted to share a little bit about myself. For those of you who don't know me, I grew up in upstate New York, went to school in a little town called Hilton, and I always felt like I was born in the wrong place. We used to go to Florida on vacation, and I loved going to Florida, being out in the sun and the warmth. I did not like the cold winters in Rochester area. So when I was 18, I joined the Air Force right out of high school because I wanted to travel. And it was a great experience. I did travel. I was stationed in Texas, Colorado Springs, Germany, and Florida. And towards the end of my 4 years I was stationed in Florida, my dad suddenly passed away, and I was really devastated. And I have to say, I always believed in God and never really read the Bible or knew Jesus. I knew of Jesus. I didn't know Jesus. But I believed in God, always tried to be a good person, never really went to church or read the Bible. And when my dad died, it kind of really threw my, the little faith that I had. I just could not understand why God would take my dad so young. He was only 52. I was 23 when he passed, and it was a big shock. My dad taught me a lot of wonderful things. He was so loving. He always encouraged me to do whatever I wanted. He loved that I was going in the Air Force. He always told me I was cute and smart, and he just really was a beautiful person. And losing him was a great loss, but it also taught me that to really appreciate the people in my life, because you never know when someone's going to die. And I think it made me a stronger person. And so I don't want to get into a lot of details about my life, but I want to kind of give the God highlights. So when I got married to my husband, John, which was in 1994, we had dated on and off for 3 years. I wrote our wedding vows, and I included some scripture. I always loved the Corinthians, love is patient, love is kind. So I had that in our vows. And I looked those up so that I could get them right. And we got married. And the first couple years were kind of rough because God was missing from our marriage. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was very independent. And so I was trying to still control everything as I was married and not really, letting my husband be the leader. So I was struggling, and I actually left him after a few years, and we tried, decided to give it a shot. So we went to a Christian marriage counselor, and he pointed out that what was missing in our marriage was God. Neither one of us really thought that was it. We're like, no, we're fighting about money. We're fighting about this. We're fighting about that. And he kept bringing up God and that we needed to get closer to God. So after a few weeks, my husband stopped going. I was very discouraged. I went back to the counselor by myself and I asked him, how do you know God wants me to be married? And he said, I can't answer that for you, Lisa, but if you get to know God, you will find your answer. So I drove home, I prayed out loud in the car, and I asked God for a sign. And nothing happened that week. Nothing changed. And I went back to the counselor the second week with the intention of telling him, I don't know what you're talking about. And I pretty much was thinking maybe we needed to get divorced at that point. So I got to the counselor early. I was sitting there in the waiting room and there was a Bible on the coffee table. So I picked it up and I opened it. And the first thing I read was, a wife is not to depart from her husband. And I started crying and I got chills. And I knew at that moment that God answered my prayer. I asked for a sign and he gave it to me. So that was the beginning of me seeking out what it meant to be a Christian, what it meant to be a good wife. And it completely changed my marriage and my life. I mean, it took some time. It wasn't overnight, but that was the first time God spoke to me through his word. Since then, there's been dreams. There's been like the dream I had about doing this podcast. It was clearly from God because it was not something I wanted to do. But because he asked me to do it and to talk about God, I felt like I really should probably listen and be obedient and do what he says. I'll just give you a few other examples of times that God has spoke to me. So several months ago, one of my aunts I knew had terminal cancer, and she had decided not to do any more treatment, and she was at home dying. And one day I was driving in the car and I very strongly heard in my head, call your uncle. And I was like, okay. Then it was like, no, seriously, like you need to call him right now. And I said, okay, I will. I'll call him when I get home. And it was like, no, you need to call him now. So I called my uncle and my cousin answered. And I asked her, how everything was going with my aunt. And she said, not good. She is unconscious now. And we actually just called hospice and they're going to come in and bring her a hospital bed and start, hospice care. So we don't know how long she has, but she said, my dad's really struggling. Do you want to talk to him? And I was like, of course. So my uncle got on the phone and I told him, God told me to call you. I didn't know why, but I'm so glad I did. And he started crying and he said, I'm so glad you called, Lisa, because today's really rough. He was heartbroken, of course. So, I think all of us get those little, maybe you should call so-and-so, or maybe don't go that way, turn left instead of right. And you need to listen to it because God is there speaking to you, whether you believe that or not, or whether you hear him or not. And the more you open your eyes and ears, the more you'll see. I've talked to a lot of different people. It's funny because, just recently I've been telling people, hey, I'm going to do a podcast, and I tell them why. And people have been opening up to me about their story. So I have a list of people that are going to be my first. I think I have 4 or 5 people lined up that I will be interviewing about their experiences with God moments and God speaking to them. And I just want to glorify God, and I want people to just listen with an open mind, whether you believe or not. It doesn't matter. It does matter, but it doesn't matter if you believe or not. God is real and Jesus is real. And my hope is that listening to this will maybe change your belief, or at least open your ears and eyes so that when God does speak to you, you hear him, and it could possibly save your life. So that is my goal and my hope. I, like I said, don't really, it may change over time, but I'm actually talking to you in my car. I drove to a parking lot where it's quiet and I blurred the background, and I'm using a website that has good audio and that I can use this to share the podcast plan on sharing clips on social media. I'll share the whole podcast places where you can download it if you would like to listen. And I know normally people just listen, they don't watch the video, but I wanted to do a video so that I could look into your eye through the video, and I wanted you to know who I was, why I'm doing this, and I just hope that it feels like home. I'll kind of go into a little bit of why I chose to name my podcast that. I am a realtor and I'm a buyer's specialist. So I primarily work with buyers. And what I tell all my buyers is that when you walk into the home that is meant for you, you will know it's going to feel like home. And I remember one of the first times I shared that with a client, he was a first-time home buyer. He had an idea of what he wanted, but every time we'd look at a house, he was just not sure. And I said, you know what, when you walk in the right house, it's going to feel like home. And I showed him, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 houses. And then one day we walked into this house and he turned and looked at me and he's like, this feels like home. And I was like, then this is the house. And this was a few years ago when the market was insane and every house that went on the market was getting like 20 offers in 3 days. So we really had to be aggressive in our offer. So I've got some tricks up my sleeve or strategies, I would say, that tend to work. But I called the listing agent and I told him, look, I've got this first time home buyer. I told him when we started that when he found the right house, it was going to feel like home and that he would know. The minute we walked into this house, he looked at me and said, this house feels like home. And the listing agent went, and he shared that with the seller, and she wanted him to have that house because she loved this house and she wanted somebody that loved it to buy it. So those are the kind of things that happen to me every day. And I bring my faith into my business because faith is the most important thing. And then to me, that's number one, then family, and then work. But if you bring your faith into your life, into your daily activities and share with people, you never know what's going to happen, but God will bless you. So that is my prayer, that you will be blessed. And I hope you'll tune in and share this podcast if it encourages you. And I look forward to interviewing other people and bringing you more stories. So thank you for tuning in. And have a great week. Thank you so much for joining me. If this episode encouraged you, I hope it felt like home. Remember that you're not alone. And if someone came to your mind while listening, please share this podcast. Take care and God bless.